In this video, I'm going to take a look at 3 problems from Chapter 1, Section 3, Exercise 1. These types of problems, again, will be heavily featured on the test. So be sure, above all, to practice. Check your answers as you're practicing. If you discover that you're consistently making a mistake, then be sure to contact me and we'll get that squared away before the actual test rolls around. So Chapter 1, Section 3, Exercise 1. In this exercise, you're going to determine whether or not an argument is deductive or inductive. And perhaps a quick little recap would be beneficial. A deductive argument aims to show that if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. It follows necessarily. In an inductive argument, the definition begins just the same. It aims to show that if the premises are true, the conclusion is likely to be true. It's probably true. So let's take a look at an example from Exercise 1, Chapter 1, Section 3. The plaque on the Leaning Tower of Pisa says that Galileo performed experiments there with falling objects. It must be the case that Galileo did indeed perform those experiments there. So here's actually an excellent example of a really common mistake. A really common mistake is really just to do a surface level analysis, to examine the language and to take it at face value. So there's the premise. The plaque says that Galileo conducted these experiments. So there's the conclusion in the last sentence. It must be the case that he actually did perform those experiments there. So it must be the case. It must be the case clearly indicates that it's deductive. If these are true, then this has to be true. It must be the case. It follows necessarily. So there's our very surface level analysis. It's deductive. After all, it says that it's got to be the case. But you're going to have to dig a little deeper than this very surface level analysis. Don't just think that since it says it must be the case, that it actually must be the case. Take a look at the structure of the argument. We've identified the premise and then, of course, the conclusion. But what we really need to do here is to evaluate the evidence. Given that the evidence is true, is the conclusion necessarily true? Is it likely to be true? Perhaps it's even a weak inductive argument, where even given a true premise or true premises, as the case might be, the conclusion even is unlikely to be true. So what is the evidence here? We've got a plaque on the Leaning Tower that says Galileo performed experiments with falling objects. So since the plaque says that, it's got to be the case. Even though the language indicates that it's deductive, this one is actually inductive. The evidence, again, is a plaque on the wall, and it seems to be a strong inductive argument. That conclusion, even though it says must, is in fact likely to be true. But clearly, the plaque could be wrong. Maybe it's misplaced, maybe the information is inaccurate. Just because a plaque says that it's the case, it doesn't necessarily mean that it actually is the case. Don't just look at the surface level language here. Dig a little deeper. It's inductive, it's strong. The plaque is probably correct. It's probably placed accurately. But this is actually an argument based on signs. And I won't write that out here. The sign being the plaque. You could also interpret this as being an appeal to a qualified authority. The authority being the plaque, or the person that had the plaque made and placed on the Leaning Tower itself. But either way, an argument based on signs, an argument based on authority, both of those are inductive. So don't just look at, well, it must, so it really must be the case. You gotta dig a little deeper. The next example, this is problem 5, and the text is pretty similar, so I'll go through this quickly. But I really want to emphasize this really common mistake. Amoco, Exxon, and Texaco are listed on the New York Stock Exchange. It must be the case that all major American oil companies are, in fact, listed on the NYSE. So again, the language here seems to indicate on the surface that it's deductive. It must be the case, so the conclusion follows necessarily. But again, dig a little deeper. Don't just look at the structure. certainly don't just look at the language. Don't just look at the structure. Okay, P1, and then it must be the case. There's our conclusion. Dig a little deeper yet. Let's evaluate the strength of the evidence. The evidence rests on a series of examples. 3 examples are given. 3 examples. There's our sample size. Therefore, the conclusion indicator isn't actually given, but there's our conclusion. Therefore, all must be this way. 3 are this way, so therefore all are this way. Is that a sufficient amount of evidence here for the conclusion to necessarily be true? And again, this is inductive. Specifically, and you'll read more about this, this one is a generalization. In a generalization, you proceed from knowledge of the sample size to a claim about an entire class, an entire group. 3 are this way, all must be this way. It's inductive. More precisely, it's a generalization. And given the size of the sample, it seems to be a fairly weak inductive argument. So we've taken a look at examples of 2 inductive arguments. One strong, one it looks like is fairly weak actually. Let's take a look at an example of a deductive argument. And this one can be kind of confusing, I suppose, but I don't think it will really require that much time for us to go through it. Either LeBron James or Michael Jordan will be the next president of the United States. LeBron James will not be the next president of the United States. Therefore, Michael Jordan will be the next president of the United States. So let's not just look at the language here. Let's quickly make note of the structure. There's P1. There's P2. James won't be the next president. Therefore, conclusion indicator. Hey, there's your clue. Therefore, Jordan will be the next president of the United States. And let's go ahead and lay this one out formally here. P1, it's either LeBron or it's Michael. I'm just going to abbreviate there, LeBron or Michael. Premise 2, it's not LeBron. Sorry, LeBron. Therefore, our conclusion, therefore, it's got to be Michael. So is this one, first of all, inductive or deductive? Deductive argument aims to show that if these are true, that's got to be true. So if these 2 are true, it's either LeBron or it's Michael, and it's not LeBron. If these are the only 2 legit options, then necessarily the next president would have to be Michael Jordan. So this one is deductive. I'll just abbreviate there as well. This one's deductive. If these 2 are true, that's got to be true. But here perhaps is the confusing part. This one is deductive. Not only is it deductive, it's valid. It doesn't just aim to show that if these 2 are true, this one is true. This one is structured properly, though it's not sound. For an argument to be sound, and you'll read more about this, there are separate videos covering as much, but I want to go a little deeper for this example. It's deductive, it's valid, it's unsound. For an argument to be sound, for a deductive argument to be sound, 2 things have to happen. Number 1, it's got to be valid, and that's the case here, it's valid, but it also has to have true premises. Now, are these premises all true? If there's just one false premise, then, okay, it can be valid, but it's automatically unsound. And of course, we know that P1 is false. Neither are actually running for President of the United States. So continue to practice. Let me know if you have questions. I'll even create video lectures here if there's a problem you want to go over in some detail. Just let me know whatever I can do to help.